Oh, all right, y'all. This is our first episode together, and it's the first episode of the season, which is great.
Woo!
So, I am really excited about this season. I think it's going to be great, and I'm really excited to have y'all on board and offering your perspectives and voices because it's been a lot that's gone on in the past over 12 months of us being in this pandemic, and so many other things have happened. So because this is our first episode, and because you guys are still new and I still want people to get to know you, I want you to introduce yourself, and then I want you to just simply tell me, how are you doing? Like, how have you been coping with everything that has happened in our country, in the world? Kalia, I'm gonna start with you. Like, how have you been? First of all, introduce yourself again so people know who you are, but then jump into how have you been doing.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Kalia. I am a single mom of two. I'm a school administrator. I have recently started a business. Why, I don't know, but I just decided to do it. And I think right now I'm in survival mode. And what that means is I have taken, throughout my life, I've taken on projects where I have committed to more than I probably should ever handle. And it puts me in this mode where I don't process how I'm feeling. I just get it done. And right now, with everything happening in our world, on top of navigating, running a school and getting transitioning from the virtual environment to in person, I am just existing. I'm focused on the task that has to be done in the moment, and I don't process feelings. I can't in this moment process feelings.
Listen, same there. I'll give my feedback on that in a few minutes. But Dr. J, how are you doing? Introduce yourself again. But how are you doing through all of this? And I think you may be on mute.
I'm Juliet. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a licensed psychologist, and I also am a research psychologist, an assistant professor. And my work really focuses on the impact of discrimination and racism on the health of people of color, and how we can intervene in some way to help people experience less negative health impacts from racism, as it is ongoing and probably will be for quite some time. So in terms of how I'm doing, I guess we're being honest.
Yeah.
I'm not doing great. I can definitely relate with the idea of, like, I feel like I'm in survival mode at this point, and I feel like I probably have been throughout most of the pandemic, but it's starting to really catch up with me, I think, and I'm really in survival mode. Like, I'm really at a point where I just have to, I spend a lot of energy each day just figuring out how am I going to make sure I eat, make sure I drink, make sure I take care of myself, and try and do as much work as I can. So, it's been rough. And I think it's getting harder, honestly. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, all right, cool. I don't have to talk to people. I don't have to leave my house. Like, I'm really introverted, so that was fine with me. But after this amount of time, it's really starting to wear on me, as I'm sure it was earlier on in the pandemic. And I've heard from a lot of people that people are, like, hitting a wall at this point. Like, a lot of people are going through this feeling of, like, I don't know if I can take this anymore. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Rebecca, how are you? And, like, how are things going with you? How are you embracing all of this?
Okay. I'm actually doing fine. The upside, other than the fear, anxiety, and all that comes with having a pandemic at the moment, being able to be near and close to my family is an upside to all of it. The fear comes in that if I go out to work, or if I were to pick up a second job, and I do everything that I can to be safe, I couldn't be around my parents. My parents are in their 60s and 70s, and late 70s for one of them. So being around them and being careful, that caused a lot of fear. Although I do have all my family here in Georgia at the moment, it's a little rough with the idea that I cannot be around them. And specifically, like how I'm doing. Like last night, I was really upset internally because, as we're going to talk about later, when it comes to social justice, all the work we did last summer, all the marching, fighting, donating, feet on the ground, and activism in our own ways, it almost feels like nobody listened to us, even in our own community, didn't learn all the things that were taught and were brought to their attention. So it's kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, I feel that. It's been a lot. I'm introverted too, so I was like, oh, yeah, work from home. So, I ain't got to deal with people. That's great. But I think for me, like I had a really big family loss in the midst of, the pandemic that happened suddenly. It wasn't like this was planned. It wasn't COVID related, but dealing with death in the midst of the world of COVID was really hard. And then there were some other things that transpired last year that I didn't necessarily deal with. And I think I did a thread about this on Twitter like a few days ago, and just how I literally had stopped therapy. So, and then by the time I got to like October, November, I was like, I got to talk to somebody because this is not going to work. And so that has been uber helpful for me. I had to, and I did something and I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. So BetterHelp is a website where all these licensed therapists are on. And so you kind of can choose based on what you are dealing with to engage in that way with a therapist. I was really hesitant about that, but it has been the best decision I think I could have ever made in all of this. Because it just really kind of helped me. Because it was just a lot. And I really kind of in that thread on Twitter just talked about how as Black women, we typically are told to be strong. And there's that idea of who we are is that we're strong. We don't hurt. Right. And historically, we know that has been accurate, especially in medical professions, of thinking that Black women don't really experience pain physically, but we also experience pain emotionally. So just trying to deal with that and giving myself permission to feel. Like, Kalia, I think I was identifying what you were saying, because I told my therapist there are days I don't even know how to identify what emotion I'm feeling because I don't know what it is. I'm just so used to just keep pushing, going, and just move on to the next thing. So now just kind of sitting in that, and, the past few days, well, last week, I think, yeah, it was last week. I just had a whole breakdown. That was the first time, like, just being able to just cry, like, oh my gosh, it's okay for me to do this. So it's been a learning curve, I think, for me, but it has also just been tough watching people go through things, and so that has played on me emotionally. So, I just exhale. If you're listening to this, y'all could just exhale. Like it's been a lot. But today, I really want us to talk about, I keep hearing with everything that's going on. So we just talked about how we've been feeling through the pandemic. Rebecca mentioned social justice that happened last summer, and then it feels like it didn't happen. That feels like a lifetime ago. We have a new president. We got rid of an old one. We got a new one. And then the old one is still, his shadow is still lingering around the country. To the insurrection. It's just been a lot, right? So out of all of those things, the things that we hear a lot is, this isn't America. This is not our country. This is not how we act. This is not what we do. And I thought it would be really interesting for us to all talk about, is this America? Or do you agree? Like, that's not our country. That's not who we are. I really want to start with the pandemic. And I can start with my thoughts, and then whoever wants to jump in, you can feel free. For me, throughout this pandemic, this is totally America, and how we have handled it, and the delays in response for being racist, even in the middle of that, calling the former president, calling it the China flu. I mean, just saying all kinds of stupid stuff, right? But the biggest thing for me is that capitalism runs this country. It reminded me throughout the pandemic how much this country hates poor people. Because capitalism really is for only a select group of people. It's not for everybody, right? Somebody has to be poor. And so looking at how we've handled the pandemic, even with people losing their jobs, and then our government is like, oh, well, no, we're going to cut off unemployment benefits, or, people being evicted, and we're not in any way, shape, form, or fashion trying to assist that. Given what was the first check we got? What was it, $1,200? And thinking that was supposed to sustain people for 7 months, when that's somebody's whole rent, right? It's $1,200 or their mortgage. That doesn't even count what they need for food, what they need. They have children, all these other needs that are there. So for me, I'm like, this is totally an America thing, because capitalism will always reign supreme in this country, period. We don't care about if you're hurting. I think what made me even more upset was hearing that I think we gained between 9 to 12 new billionaires in the midst of this pandemic. These people got richer while other people were poor, and they're being tossed out of their homes, and they don't have anything to eat. So all of that for me is totally an America thing. And that's how I think about it. So when I hear people say that we're the greatest country on earth, I'm like, I don't know, because looking at how other countries have handled the pandemic alone, they paid their people to stay home. They made sure that they did not have to pay rent, and they made sure that, landlords were able to still sustain and not have to worry about that. So that was how I saw America being America, the real America, and throughout the pandemic. But I'm curious your thoughts. For me, it was a capitalism perspective. I don't know if y'all saw anything else, or you felt anything else through the pandemic that you felt like, yeah, this is how we roll. This is how we operate.
I think what I have seen is the individualism of America. I'm going to do what I want, how I want, when I want, and nobody is going to tell me what to do. And that is over community. It's over family. It is about me and my personal rights, or how I perceive what my personal rights should be. And it has shown up in really ugly ways. And I think with the former president, it spoke to a place in America where people feel justified. They feel like they should have a right and everyone else should get on board. And it speaks to a really ugly white nationalist underbelly of our country, because ultimately that is who we centered in all of this. It was those people, it was people with money, it was people who were white, it was people who wanted to exist in a way that harkened back to an America of the old, where they weren't accountable, where they didn't have to be accountable, where laws did not apply to them, still don't apply to them. And so that's what I've seen. It's just that ugly individualism that does not care about anyone else.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. But can I say something too? And I'm sorry, I got to put race on this. The people that I see exhibiting the individualism a lot are white Americans, or like, and not all white Americans, but it's this entitlement of like other, like Black people and Asian people and Hispanic people. All of us realize the heart of community. So we're like, this is for the greater good. So we know that this is what we need to do. Yes. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. I don't want to really do this, but I understand my neighbor is important. So that's who I need to take care of, even though it's uncomfortable. Where I have seen it though, heavily, is in this, and this to me is still racist in its mindset. Like, oh, y'all need to do that, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to make any adjustments. We're not going to, because that's infringing on my rights. what rights? Like, what are you talking about? Like, why does putting a mask on mean that somebody's infringing on your rights? So that's been alarming to me. It's been weird, honestly. It's been predictable. It's weird to me, but it's predictable at the same time. I don't know. So Rebecca, Dr. Juliet, how do y'all feel?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. And I think what this pandemic has really revealed to me, and I'm hoping that, you know, the pandemic response moving forward is going to be better. But last year, you know, it just really highlighted all the isms that are, you know, rampant in the United States. You know, it highlighted racism, of course, classism, ableism, ageism, all those things, because there was a way in which a lot of the discourse around COVID-19 was like, well, how do we approach this? And there was a large faction of people who thought, well, we should just kind of let nature take its course. And, you know, people might die, but it's only a small amount of people. And, you know, they're all old anyway. And, you know, or they have pre-existing conditions and they may be disabled, you know, or it's, you know, mostly Black and Latino people. And so that's what I've really seen, is this way in which it's highlighted who's valued in our society and who isn't. And that's really come through, I think. And the other thing that I was going to say is that, well, I forgot now. So next time, maybe I'll remember, when you have too many thoughts to hold in your mind at the same time. But yeah, it's really highlighted just all of the inequality in all these different ways. And the way that it intersects as well. And what I was going to say is that at the beginning of the pandemic, to be honest, you know, even though we had a president who, you know, was not doing a good job of running the country, I was surprised by how poorly the pandemic was handled. And then as time went on and we started to see more data about who was more likely to be affected by COVID, who was more likely to die, and things like that, it started to make sense to me that this is why the pandemic is not being taken as seriously. When, you know, if the sort of privileged classes of individuals in our country, like particularly, you know, white Americans and people of higher socioeconomic status, able-bodied people, younger people, if those are the people who are being mostly affected by this pandemic, I think the response would have been very different, even with the president that we had. So, you know, it's really just brought all of that to the forefront for me.
Yeah. I don't know if I think that it would have been different with that president, only because that party has really become anti-science. So I genuinely don't, it could have affected everybody. And they, you know what I'm saying? Like there seems to be this war with science and engineers and people who are saying this is going to happen. Even what we're seeing with climate change, they're so resistant. What we're seeing right now happen in Texas literally could have been avoided if people would have just simply listened to scientists and engineers to say, this is what is needed. This is coming down the road. We need to deal with this. But there seems to be this war within them that, you know, science isn't real. It's a hoax and it's all lies. So part of me feels like even if it affected everybody the same, like COVID-19 affected everybody the same, I still feel like it would have been exactly the same thing because they're so anti-science. And I don't get that. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. But sometimes I think they're anti-science, like that certain, factions of the government and the people are anti-science until something's going to affect them. Like, for example, with former President Trump, you know, he was like very anti-wearing a mask and talking about all of this stuff. And then when he got COVID, he went straight to the hospital and got all of the care that he could possibly get and, you know, did what he needed to do. So I think that there's a certain extent to which, you know, they don't believe in science until science is needed to help, you know, a particular group of people. Yeah. But I think it's a really good point because there is a lot of this anti-science rhetoric that is very loud and clear in America as well.
Absolutely. Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
So I was thinking that these people with money, access, and power are anti-science because it will cause them to use their money to spread wealth amongst other people or to not make as much money. Like what's happening in Texas. Texas's electricity and other things aren't regulated because it would have cost someone money. So I think that they know science is real. They know that these things are real and they're backed up because, you know, they send their children to school and they do all these things to elevate their status. But with anything that has to do with money, it's not real if it's going to cost me to spend my money. I think it's Austin where everyone in affluent neighborhoods, the city might be incorrect, all have power, but as you move out of the affluent neighborhoods and probably more southern, they don't have power, they don't have access, they're dying. And but the other parts of the city work perfectly fine. And they would have spent the money to make sure that their neighborhoods, their areas are taken care of. So I think it's that, like, I don't think that they don't believe in science. As long as science benefits them, they're going to go forth with it. And it also brings into the point of, like, if I have power, access, money, and I'm white, and I say these things, the people who don't have anything other than being white, they're going to listen to me and they're going to run with it. Because if whiteness is all that you have that keeps you above somebody, the people who have the power are going to make you believe that that's the thing.
I think go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Rebecca, you touch on something that has been baffling to me when you think about the story of America. And people say, well, we're the wealthiest nation on earth. But when you dig into that, when you dig into who has money, who has access, who has power, and who has representation because of that, there are a lot of people in this country who are going without simply because they don't meet a certain threshold. And when you think about the small minority, the handful of people who are controlling the laws, who are creating policies, who have overtaken our legislative system, our judicial system, it is alarming to see. I think this is where America is becoming something really ugly in ways I think deregulation, I think business taking over our legislative system, getting into politics, has kind of morphed the ugliness. It's like a mutated form of just injustice in this country, where you have natural disasters in Texas, where you have hurricanes in Puerto Rico, where we are capable of sending assistance, sending help, and we let people die. We refuse to send assistance because of money and power. And it's absurd. And that's where sometimes for me, I'm like, yes, America is an ugly place. But then I get to this point where there's such a disconnect because I'm like, but we can fix this. Why aren't we acting? And then I'm like, oh, yeah, well, that is America, power and money.
Absolutely. I think on top of that, for me, like, even if I go, like, rewind the tape all the way back, even with Donald Trump being elected, to me, that right there, it's the signifier that power, money, and whiteness will always be the thing that's America. That's what drives it. And to me, this country as a whole was built on white supremacy. So it will always do what it needs to do to protect itself as far as white supremacy is concerned. So we're not going to be concerned about all of these other groups if it's going to impact and affect my power, my money, any of that. I will always pick white supremacy over all of that. So you can see the traces, even with the pandemic, of that being upheld. And to me, that has been what is incredibly infuriating. Like, it's like you're choosing your power over helping people. And we're going to get into this a little bit later, but you're choosing your power over prosecuting a person who completely encouraged the insurrection over our government. Like, it just, like, none of it makes sense. It all connects. It's just like, it's the same story. It's just, it just keeps showing up in different ways. So I kind of want to dive into something because last summer, George Floyd was the kickoff, right? So we see this video of George Floyd and this officer arresting him and having his knee on this man's neck for over 8 minutes and basically winds up killing him. And it kicks off this surge of support and protest and activism all across the country and literally really the world. I think there is a popular video of George Floyd's daughter saying, "Daddy changed the world," because you see all of this engagement, especially in our country, centered around Black Lives Matter. Is that the first sign of Black Lives Matter? No, Black Lives Matter has been around for years, right? And they've been doing this work. But last summer, that's when we really saw other people really get involved and really start trying to pay attention. But here we are, it's 2021, and I'm curious from y'all, from what we saw last summer to what we see now, and even with what we just talked about with the pandemic. So we had people of all races, all creeds, all genders, all just saying Black Lives Matter. Do you think that was effective? Did it work? Was it performative? Like what are your thoughts around what happened last summer and then what we've seen since? Rebecca, I think you just unmuted yourself. You want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. I think it was performative. When we see people on social media, because I'm on social media often. So when we see people on social media and all the BLM that was put in bios and saying kind and nice words towards Black and brown people, I feel that most of it was performative. I will say in my experience, I did march in Atlanta. And when I was walking through the crowd from the main part of Centennial Olympic to the back, they were asking people to chant. They were starting the chant, getting people excited about doing the march. As you got towards the edge of the park and there were more fair-skinned people, there was less chanting. There was less using their voices. There was less, and it kind of worried me that people came out to the park, came out to walk with us, to march with us, but were not willing to use their voices. And in a space where you would feel comfortable using your voice and spreading your voice, I didn't see a lot of it. And I wondered how that would transfer into talking to your coworkers, your family members. Some of it was useful, changing people's hearts, mending broken bonds and teaching people. But the large outpour that I saw, I feel it was mostly performative because you'll see some of those same people say racist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic things with those things like in their bio, or that black square is still on their profile. And I see it even in the Black American community, because that's the only one I can speak wholeheartedly about. I still see things like transphobia, homophobia, and all of that. And we talked to y'all about that last year. There were countless hours, countless protests and words and speeches spoken about this. So it's like heartbreaking, and it's like y'all could have kept it.
Yeah. I honestly feel like that's going to have to be an episode of talking about homophobia and transphobia in the Black community, because it is heavy. Still, we still have these, like, still. And I'm like, dude, come on, y'all. Like, this is 2021. Come on, let's do better.
I mean, and let's not forget misogyny.
And, oh my God, like, I could talk about that forever. Seriously. And not that just men are like seeing women be gatekeepers of misogyny. Like that, for me, it irks my entire soul. Anyway, I can't get off on a tangent. Dr. J, Kalia, how do y'all feel about what you saw last summer with the protests and then like what's happened since?
I think when I think about social justice movements, there's been ebbs and flows where it pricks the consciousness, people speak, and typically in the past, you've seen legislation, which in our country, and there's a book, Stamped which is Racism in America. He speaks about, in the book, he speaks about like what's going to get us there. And part of what it takes to have lasting change and justice in America is just laws that can be enforced by our judicial system. We're seeing something different right now, but typically, historically, when you have the social justice movements, there's been change in our legislation and we've seen something come from it. What we saw last summer, there was very little substantive legislative change. We got companies to say, Aunt Jemima is going away. We're going to change the name of the syrup bottle. That's not what we're asking for. But nothing meaningful as far as legislation. And so when I think about last summer, it was like, yeah, that happened. But until you have anything behind it that's going to impact people's day-to-day lives, I do think it was performative, because the people who could have had a say-so in the laws, could have a say-so in the policies that we pass in this country, sat on their hands because they did not want to. And I'm hoping something will change with this current administration. But I think we're starting to see the reality is, as much as I am relieved that our current president is in office, I understood that he was returning us to the status quo. He was getting us back to balance where we could be racist with a smile on our face politely. But it wasn't going to result in change for poor people, for people of color, for people who live on the margins in this country. And I think we're seeing the backpedaling and the desire to make peace with people who fundamentally hate people who look like us on principle. So yeah, I do think it was performative. And I think it's because we didn't do anything to make that change last.
Yeah. Dr. J.
I mean, I think I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I think, like Kalia was saying, it's absolutely the case that, activist movements and social justice movements ebb and flow. And, I think what happened this summer, to me, is actually a reflection of what happened in 2014, 2015, when Michael Brown was killed in St. Louis, which is where I lived at the time, or in Ferguson, rather. And there was a huge uprising there. That also, I think, was also a global uprising. And there were a lot of marches, and there was a lot going on around that, and a lot of people who became more interested and invested in racial justice. And what I saw happening is, first of all, there is a lot of performativeness, I guess, if that's a word, to a lot of the activism that people demonstrate. Absolutely. And a lot of it happens on social media, where people can just type something up and press enter, and they feel like their work is done. I think there's a small fraction of people who sort of learn from these uprisings and then continue to do the work. Mostly that's people of color, but there are also, of course, white allies who engage in that work as well. And another thing I see happening is that we also are all very, especially in the United States, very into this hot button story of the moment, and everybody jumps on it, and then everybody gets kind of bored of it and moves on to the next thing. So there's that happens as well. But another thing that I've seen is that oftentimes there's so much energy and action and effort that goes into these uprisings from Black people and other people of color. And there isn't always a balance with sort of taking care of ourselves and pacing ourselves. And so sometimes what I've seen is people burn out, and then we sort of take a step back and have to heal ourselves and recover and recuperate. And so there's this lull oftentimes. And unfortunately, white allies often don't do enough to pick up the slack from there. And so when Black people and other people of color sort of retreat in a way to take care of ourselves and try and continue to survive and take care of our lives, there's sort of no one there to pick up the next steps. And, I've seen some what look like maybe potentially possibly sustainable changes in some of the places where I work, but you know, it still really remains to be seen what happens. But I really do connect with that sense of like, okay, it happened, and like, what's next? And it sort of feels like things have really died down and we're not getting as much attention. But I do think that there are people who are continuing to do work behind the scenes and continuing to work on things. And I think that, you know, that's an important thing to just remember, because I think it helps us be more optimistic and hopeful. You know, and there were some wins, but they're sort of smaller scales. So like, for example, in Oakland, California, the Oakland Unified School District decided to get rid of their police force, basically, and instead spend that money on social workers and other things like that. So there've been small wins in, you know, very, you know, like in specific communities. But I do agree that we need some broader national level policy law attention to the issues that that Black people are facing, and that we're not going to make a lot of progress without that top down and bottom up approach. Both have to be happening.
I totally agree. I think for me, I think I'm at this point now where it's like, stop asking me to solve something that I didn't create.
Yep.
And that's where I was getting frustrated, because throughout all of that, you know, if you have, you know, white peers in your life, or, you know, whether it could be family members, whether it be coworkers, whether it be just friends, you know, I think it was in some ways genuine, where it was like, you know, what can we do? How can we fix this? But there were parts where I was like, you can't keep asking Black people how to fix white supremacy and racist ideologies when we did not create that. Like, that's not, you can't keep putting that at our doorstep, because what it does is it absolves you from responsibility and from you actually doing the work.
Yeah.
And to me, what makes this America is that I feel like Black people, we are always, and people of color as well, we are always having to save something or educate. And it's like, when do you all start doing some work? Because we're tired. We're trying to carry a movement. We're dealing with racism, both in a systemic way and intrapersonally. Like, every day of our lives, we are carrying this. It's exhausting. I need you to try to do some work in regards to this. There's too many resources. There's too many things that are out there. That's number one. But number two is the performative aspect of it really was irritating me. Case in point, here you have the person who is over the NFL say Black Lives Matter. And, you know, we totally understand. I mean, this whole whack ass apology that you want to put out, and here Colin Kaepernick is still being blackballed. He was right. You just admitted that what he has been silently protesting about, he was not even causing any craziness. He was just taking a knee and bringing attention to what was happening to people that look like him. You blackball him. This man is still not working. And here we are 5 years later. So I'm not here for your bullshit apology. Put that man back to work. Like, he's been ready to go, and he will tell you, I'm still training. If you call me tomorrow, I'm going to come. I'm going to be ready. I'm there. And so for me, that's what I kept seeing. That's just an example, but I saw it in so many different ways. I don't give a damn about your black square on your social media. I don't care anything about that when you still are not hiring Black people in your company, or they're not making the equivalency of what their white counterparts are. Or you only want to hire Black people in D&I work, and there's nothing wrong with D&I work, but that's the only place you want to hire them when you're not putting them in other levels in your company. Like, miss me with it. So that's where I am. And we still are seeing that. So for me, the performative nature is totally America.
Yeah.
Like, and where I kept really honestly getting frustrated is, well, we're doing this. This should make you feel better. You don't get to tell me how, like, you don't get to do that. I tell you, like, no, this is not acceptable. This is not okay. And you don't get to come back to me and say, well, no, we did, but I know what you said, but we're doing this over here. Shouldn't that make you feel better? No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. You're not going to center your feelings around this. And you cannot make this about your feelings. And I remember I actually had to do a whole thread about that on Twitter. It's like, listen, I love y'all, but you cannot have your feelings be centered in this, when Black and brown people are telling you this is not acceptable, this is not enough, right? So we're still there. We are literally still there. So after all of that in the summer, after all of these people buying Black Lives Matter shirts and, like Rebecca said, putting it in their bios and changing the cover art on their social media, you're still being oppressive, and you're not even realizing it. It's like that was just so you could make yourself feel better. That really was not about trying to enact any form of change. So that's where I am with that. Y'all can tell I had that bottle up for a good minute.
I'm glad you got it out. I mean, there's a lot that maybe I'll talk about later, because I don't, for Anna, whatever. I don't want to necessarily share everything because some people may know who they are, but it's something that I've experienced personally, sort of this, everybody's into it. And now, I've experienced that personally, and so that has been really difficult. But at the same time, and it's hard because then I have conflicting emotions, because when this summer, when George Floyd was killed, there was so much I was asked to do. And I felt like my work was being recognized in a way that I felt like it already should have been, but wasn't. And then now I'm kind of and it really I was overworked and I got burnt out. And I feel like now I'm almost a little relieved that we can sort of just live our lives and not be expected to do all of this work to try and get rid of racism right now, all within the next 6 months, because I feel like that was a bit of an expectation. And I'm kind of glad to be able to kind of go back to just being me. And so, yeah, that was another part of it. I think that was really hard because it put a lot of pressure on Black people, even though I think some people maybe didn't realize that, but it does put a lot of pressure on many of us to kind of, carry the load. And that's detrimental to our mental health as well.
And to that point, Dr. J, I think that is part of what exhausts us in these movements. It's not only do we have to carry the load of day-to-day racism, when it shows up in our workplace in the way that it has, when we have to ingest it every day on TV, where we might be innocently scrolling for, our mental sanity, and we get to see somebody be murdered unintentionally just because we want to post lynch porn on the internet. It is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. And we still do the work. And I think that's part of what's amazing about us. We still do the work to save the heart and soul of this country. Which we saw with the election. We still show up for the interest of everybody else, even when those interests are against us. Because what we knew was we had to get that man out of office. He was going to destroy our very democracy. And I think seeing all of the stuff now with the insurrection, it is infuriating, because I'm you will spite your face. Racism is absolutely irrational, but to see it play out where you will burn this country down versus hearing and recognizing and relenting to the fact that Black, brown people have a voice in this country that we're entitled to, that we are doing this in your best interest so that we can all be okay. And you would rather burn the country down. And we still have to get up and show up and take care of our families and take care of ourselves and get the work done that is asked of us, because unemployment is really ugly for us. We don't get to bounce back like other people do. So we have no choice but to grind. But I think even with that, that's where I'm I recognize the beauty of who we are as a people. And I recognize how American it is, because we've been doing it from the beginning of time, doing the work to build this country and save this country again and again and again.
Every damn day. Literally every day. It's oh my God. And you just hit the nail on the head for me, because even with the insurrection, when Officer Eugene Goodman, they're oh my God, he's a hero. He's the best. He saved these lives. And I'm here yet again, we are having to save a freaking country that does not give a flying crap about us because y'all stood up in that chamber applauding him for his work and still did not prosecute the person who put his life in danger and all of y'all's life in danger. Miss me with that. That's where I'm at. Literally, it is. We are always having to save this. We are always having to sacrifice for this. And you still don't care. You don't care every day. But anyway, I think Dr. J, you were about to say something.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think Kalia did hit the nail on the head. I mean, and I think part of the reason why we keep continuing to try and save this country over and over and over again is that it's our country. I mean, we built it
for free.
Right. And so we want this country to thrive, but for some reason there's this resistance to it. And I think that whiteness comes along with this certain amount of comfort that people are just not willing to let go of. And so oftentimes people will say oh, I don't see color. I don't care if you're red, black, blue, or green or whatever. And to me, it's just okay, well, let's get rid of race. Let's not talk about race anymore. What is that going to mean for you? Right? This racial hierarchy that we have works really well for certain people, particularly white people or people who are closer to whiteness. And so I think people have this sense of justice, that's inherent to us, but are not really able or willing to do the actual hard work that it takes and let go of the privileges that people have in order to actually make this an equal and fair country. So, we keep going for it because, like I said, it's our country, but, I fear that people are not going to want to let go of what comes along with their whiteness. And that's what's going to have to happen in order for us to dismantle racism.
Absolutely. Rebecca, did you have any thoughts before we start jumping into the insurrection?
I was going to say something about what Dr. J said. When she said the thing where people be like, I don't care if you're red, black, blue, whatever, you're a racist. Because I need you to see color. I need you to see my color. I need you to see that I am Black in my experience. I need you to see Indigenous people and their color and their experiences, because it's not always about everyone is not on the same playing field. So you have to see my race. You have to see their race so you can see their perspective and so you can act accordingly. Saying that you don't see color is a cop-out. I don't see color. I see everyone equal. You may think that you don't, but your white constituents see us, know how they can use us to their advantage. So you need to see me. You need to see my color, and you need to see my experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. We don't have time to jump into this. This probably has to be a whole nother episode, but a part of where that comes from, we have to dive into the theology of white evangelicalism because they push that narrative a lot. But we don't have time. But just know,
so many words.
That's
so many thoughts.
That's a 2-hour episode.
That is literally going to be a 2-hour episode of just unpacking all of that because they push that so heavy. Oh my goodness! So that may have to be one of the episodes for sure. But I want to jump into the insurrection, January 6th, 2021. That will forever be burned into a lot of our memories. I remember where I was when my phone started ding, ding. And I was like, what is going on? And then I see the headline, insurrectionists have, well, I don't think they had insurrectionists. It was just people have stormed the Capitol. And I was like, the Capitol? So I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe they just hit the steps. But then I started seeing video. I mean, oh my goodness. I had never seen, I think I just looked at the phone like, that was my face because I just could not believe that it felt surreal. And so I just knew like, okay, I heard what that man, I hate calling him president. I heard what that man said to his supporters. And and what he has been saying for the past 4 years. And so a part of me knew this was inevitable, because there is this thing of make America great again, and this is our country. So there was always that type of rhetoric, but I still think I wasn't all the way prepared for people actually going into the cap and breaking into the Capitol and desecrating the Capitol with feces and their urine and breaking into offices and stealing things and all of that. And so the biggest thing as this was unfolding on our TVs was, oh my God, this is not our country. Like, what has our country turned into? For me, I was like, this is totally our country. Do y'all not know the history of how it started? like it started with this type of violence. But what we're seeing now is knowing that people were going there to literally murder, like literally kill people in Congress. He put the vice president's life in jeopardy. These people were going to hang. What would have happened if just for those short few moments, because literally it was just a few minutes between them breaking into the Capitol and them whisking away all of our representatives and people in Congress and, the vice president at that point. What would have happened if they would have got hold of them?
I think I will say I know this country has gone to really ugly places, and we're capable of absolute horrid things. I think what I was not prepared for was how many people who swore the oath to defend and protect our Constitution stepped aside, especially when you're talking about the Capitol and what it represents to our democracy. Like, January 6th still sits with me because I'm still like, so what comes next? Because it set the stage for something really ugly in this country. But I think being a military brat, I have always trusted in the back of my mind that the Marines, everybody, I love all the other, that the Marines was raised by a Marine, would be there. Would not let anything like that go down. That the Pentagon just down the road would send whatever was necessary to protect our democracy. Because it at that point, it's not just about we hate these people. It's about the heart of our country and the stage that we know that was set way back when we fought the first Civil War. What happens when we forsake the democracy completely? And that's where, for me, it was like, okay, I know America has this race issue that is at the core of why we're so damn dysfunctional. But I did not expect our elected officials, I did not expect our military, those who swore a vow to protect and serve, to step aside. Yeah. And abandon our democracy. Yeah. That to me is still like how deep it had to go for the people to get into the Capitol, for police forces not to show up, for people not to intervene. Like, it really speaks to an ugly dysfunction. And again, like, it sits on my chest because I'm like, what's coming? Because it speaks to so much more dysfunction than I think I wanted to acknowledge in our country.
I think it also speaks to like the depth of white privilege and white supremacy in our country, because you just saw the extreme differences in the ways that police responded to the insurrectionists at the Capitol and the way that they respond to like Black Lives Matter protests. And I think it shows that like there's a way in which there are people in power who are willing to give up our democracy to uphold white supremacy. Like, white supremacy is really the thing that needs to be upheld. It's not like democracy is great, but if we have to give up white supremacy to uphold democracy, you're not going to do that. And that's kind of the message that I received from what I saw. And I think that seeing that on TV was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Like, I still haven't recovered from that. Like, it really affected my mental health. And also as a survivor of trauma, like, just watching it on TV was really like, because it was getting towards my worst fear, which was that the government would be overthrown and then we'd have a dictator. Like that was my worst fear that I was just turning over in my head for years and years. And then we see the insurrection. I'm like, yeah, like what's next? What's going to happen tomorrow? And so it's like we're constantly on edge. And now that Trump has not been impeached or not been convicted, he can run again. So now we're still in this space of like waiting to see what's going to happen. And like, it's like we can never rest even for a moment.
Yeah. I think to your point, I think what it highlighted for me is there will always be extreme measures taken to protect white supremacy, because it's not even just about Trump now. Now we have laid the groundwork for someone worse to come along and not be held accountable, because the
Yes.
entire message that we sent to not only the country, to the entire world, is that we will not hold this type of behavior accountable. Because what it will do is what we talked about earlier. It threatens our power. It threatens the rhetoric that you keep hearing from Republicans. Is like, we got to change these laws, because if we don't, we're never going to be elected again. They know they're being trashed. Like, it's not even but they know that we have to wield our power. And that's why they tap into that group as they do, because they know certain code words, certain things can get them riled up. They're always going to be willing to protect it, because power, money, prestige, and more importantly, whiteness, it has to be protected at all costs, even when it's to the detriment of the country. And that's the lesson that I walk away with. They don't care. It's like, here's the thing too. I knew that the soul of our elected officials was gone when they did absolutely nothing to do gun reform after Sandy Hook happened. If little children, their bodies being ripped apart by bullets because of the type of machinery that this guy had when he went into that school, if seeing that, hearing the pain from these parents of their children being split in different parts, because that's how much damage that machine gun did to their bodies. If that will not move you, nothing will. So after that, I didn't have any faith. I didn't care what happens. I don't care what goes on. The fact that y'all never even moved on that didn't move you. You were still willing to try to protect whiteness at all costs. Yeah, so these people just broke into the Capitol. I had no faith that they were going to convict this man at all, because they have consistently shown us. So this speech that, Mitch McConnell gives after acquitting him, it's the performativeness that just irritates my entire soul. That's what I can't do. Just say, look, I'm a white man. I'm an old white man. I'm rich, and I have enjoyed the benefits of both of those things, and I really want to protect that. I probably will respect you more, but don't sit here and play in our faces. And you're like, oh, well, I'm going to acquit him, but then give this scathing speech about how this was all his fault. He did this. Like, I can't wrap my mind around that. I will never be able to properly dissect that. For me, that's heavy. Go ahead.
It's the gaslighting, right? Do one thing, say the opposite, and maybe some people will believe what you said instead of noticing what you did.
Oof. Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
I wasn't surprised. I was sitting right here at my desk, and my boss sent me emails like, go look at the news. When I looked at the news, saw it, wasn't surprised. Doesn't surprise me, not for all the things that we've seen, all the things that we've heard and experienced. That didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise me that nobody was prepared. The National Guard didn't come. Didn't surprise me. It also didn't surprise me that there were teens and young adults who posted the date, talked about it on TikTok, publicly let everyone know January 6th is the day, and we're gonna come and we're gonna fuck some shit up. They told us, they said it publicly, and nothing happened to them, their moms, nothing. I wasn't surprised by the actions in the Capitol. I also wasn't surprised that the panic buttons were Ayanna Pressley's office. that AOC had a tough time that day. She was fearful for her life. That didn't surprise me at all. Black people, well, not all black people, not specifically black people, but people of color who use their voice in that way, I always fear for their safety. And it wasn't surprising of January 6th didn't surprise. I mean, I guess it was the surprise of, oh, it's actually happening. But the farther they went into the Capitol, the more stuff they stole, the more offices they broke into, it didn't surprise me at all. The fact that, well, I don't know this for sure, but that officers were most likely telling people where to go, where to find people, what doors, what corridors, that also didn't surprise me.
What surprised me was that it wasn't worse, honestly. Like, I was actually surprised when it was kind of dissipating, and I was like, okay, all right. Like, what's next? Because I thought that was going to be worse.
I think it's those minutes Marielle mentioned, between them being on the floor and them not being on the floor. The minutes separated the two.
Yeah.
And just to bring up, like last summer, it was all about, we need to have police reform. We need to work on how police engage with people. We need more healthcare services to engage with people who are having a crisis. And then when we look, this is kind of funny, but looking at the Capitol, and then y'all go over there and you beat up cops. What happened to Blue Lives Matter? What happened to the Thin Blue Line? What happened to, police officers? And police officers from Georgia, Seattle, other states went to the Capitol, and then you go over there and you beat up Capitol Police. It's not surprising.
All while holding Blue Lives Matter flags, FYI.
But when you think about it in the context of 2 presidents ago in this war on terror, I am honestly just like, so we fought about terrorists.
We're still fighting.
Around.
Yeah, they actually don't care, because the US committed war crimes during that war while we were over there. Technically heinous crimes while we were over there. So they don't care about holding up those values. We went over there and we tore people's families apart and their bodies apart. And then we just killed a bunch of people, and then we're like, and
I think that's what the gaslighting, where it's like, so it wasn't about terror at all. It was never about terrorists, because you just let terrorists walk, hop, skip, jump out of the Capitol after committing an act
after they filmed it live and said I was there, went live and everything.
And then had the nerve to post and say, we need help finding these people. You had them. You let them go. You didn't want to find them. The gaslighting of just the acts of just horror we have experienced as Black and brown people in the name of keeping our country safe, except when the ones we need to keep it safe from are white nationalists. Like, that is, to me, is just, I every time I think about it, I get really angry. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm like holding my hands, because I'm just like, the more I think about what happened on January 6th and the implications for our government moving forward, and what it signaled to true terrorists on what they can do from videos of the Capitol and how it's laid out. Like,
yeah. And
absurd.
You're right. We will punish terrorists if they are brown. If they are white, we are not. How do I know? Because an entire a block in an American city was bombed on Christmas Day, and we heard about it one day, and it went away. Had that person's last name been even associated with the Muslim faith, or that person had been a Black or brown person in this country, it would have been 24/7. I mean, they wouldn't have let up at all. We still don't even have any information. We literally heard about this bombing one day.
Right.
And that level of the city block.
Well, and then it's blamed on mental illness, which all that they're like, oh, well, there was something, mentally wrong with him or whatever, and then what that does is it just further stigmatizes mental illness and people with mental illness, and excuses and minimizes the role of hatred and white supremacy in the reason why this happened. You know, so somebody may have a mental illness and may do something like this, but the reason they did it wasn't because they were mentally ill. It's because they hold certain ideologies that led them to feel like this is how they needed to sort of express that.
Yeah.
You know, so
go ahead, Rebecca.
This makes me think of I'm younger. I don't recall this at all, but Columbine, I was far too young at all. And I over the years I've heard, oh, you know, they weren't stable, they weren't this, they weren't that. And then the older I get, the more I hear that, oh, they were calling the Black students N-words as they shot them, or they had a bunch of like white nationalist ideas before they even went. So it was like, so you're like Dr. J said, you're blaming mental illness when it's most likely not their mental illness. It's all these other things. And it's kind of like the insanity plea, or the what's the plea that it's the when you kill, if you were to kill someone who's gay or trans or something like that, and there's this plea, the gay panic. And so that's still legal. So like even things like that.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So there have been these cases where someone has killed someone who is gay or in that community, and then in court they'll use I don't know if that's the specific name, but it's the gay panic, where you killed them or assaulted them because you panicked because of their identity or sexuality. And I think it has worked. And I know that it hasn't, but it's still used. So they'll say, "Oh, I killed them because they were gay. They approached me, or I approached them, and then I found out that they were gay or trans, and that's the reason that I killed them."
Wow. That's
another show, but
yeah, I'm gonna sit with that. I don't like this equating, like, and somebody Black posted this on Twitter, and I was like, if you don't take this down, they were like, well, racism is a mental illness. See, this is what y'all keep doing. What you're not going to do is to absolve people from responsibility. I said, and then I think statistically, people who suffer from mental illness are typically victims more than they are aggressors.
Yes.
So it's like, could y'all stop? Like, just stop perpetuating it. Stop saying that. Stop absolving people from responsibility for their actions and for being indoctrinated into these spaces. Whereas we're looking at QAnon and this crazy Marjorie Green woman like, that's not mental illness. Like, stop putting that on them. No, it's not right. It's not fair. It's wrong. Go ahead.
Because our Black and brown people who have mental illness, they're not shooting up high schools or elementary schools or movie theaters or other public spaces, concerts.
I mean, not even only that. I mean, we really, like, just even mental illness or not, we are not seeing a lot of Black people going around shooting up any sort of
That's a great point.
or anything in the name of any kind of ideology or political ideology or any terrorism, what's like really at all in this country. And to me, that's honestly really interesting. And I'd really like to understand more of that, because I think that well, there's certainly a lot of like, oh my God, like, well, Black Lives Matter protests, we're so scared, like something terrible is going to happen. It's like, really, nobody ever gets hurt. There's not like mass levels of violence. I mean, and I don't know, that's just interesting to me. Like why that is, you know, like why Black people are not doing more like that, because and yeah, so I'm just curious from a psychological level, sort of why that is, like why, yeah. And the fact that it's just totally unacknowledged and, you know, yeah.
There's this quote, and I can't remember her last name. Her first name is Kimberly, and she's a social justice activist here in Atlanta. But she did a speech that went viral, and towards the end of the speech, she was like, "You're lucky what we want is justice and not revenge."
Exactly.
And every time I think about it, I was like, what would happen if we really did want revenge? Like, what would you do?
Burn the whole country, just be up in flames. Listen, I'm telling you, like, the fact, and what's crazy is that you mentioned that, because I swear to you, I was thinking about her like literally earlier when we were talking. If you just take two Americas, because literally we have them. If January 6th, 2021 was Black Lives Matter, it would have been a complete bloodbath.
Oh my God.
Even down to, and I don't know if y'all saw these interviews, but I cannot remember her name. The lady who is the curator of Culture Tags, which is like a game about Black culture and things like that. Her dad was a Capitol Hill police officer for like over 30 years. Like he was high ranking. And she asked him, so she creates this thread on Twitter, and she said she was talking to her father about the lack of police presence and how these people were able to like penetrate the Capitol. And he was like, that means somebody was not doing their job. They would not have even made it up the steps. And he starts explaining that there was a time where Farrakhan was coming to DC, and he only had 4 people with him. And he said when Farrakhan came with just 4 people with him, that they had a whole SWAT team in it was like a parking garage that was near where the Capitol is, ready to go. And so he was saying the very fact that people were, first of all, able to even get on the steps. He was like, you have to understand, typically when people are, you know, coming to the Capitol and there's going to be some type of protest, you double up on security. And he was like, the police presence just was not there. And so he just starts kind of walking through that. And I'm thinking, yeah, because had this been Black Lives Matter, this would have gone a whole different way.
I mean, down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, racism is really going to be the downfall of this country if it continues this way, because, you know, because of that, because of the fact that, you know, places like the Capitol are left vulnerable due to this bias that people have and this racism of thinking that somehow it's okay to let a certain group of people do something and it's not okay to let another group of people do something. So I think that ultimately it's really going to hurt. I mean, it really hurts this country at the end of the day.
I finally understand what y'all said earlier about if, like, you all said something about white supremacy. They will hold on to white supremacy, and in order to lose everything else, they will lose everything else to keep white supremacy. And having the conversation about the insurrection, it just clicked. Like, you will show people how to get in the Capitol, how to walk through the Capitol, in order to uphold white supremacy, because the things that you were sharing about how to get here and there and all of that, it could be shared to people from anywhere. So you'll do that. You'll put people's lives in danger to keep up white supremacy, not knowing you're probably risking more lives in the process.
Yeah,
absolutely. So we've covered a lot. I just kind of want to get your final thoughts and your last thoughts. Kalia, I don't know if you want to kick us off, like just how you're feeling about what the future holds, and, you know, what are some lasting thoughts that you have?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, just thinking about January 6th and thinking about the outcome of the election, is it may really get much uglier before it gets better, because almost half this country supported the other side. And what stage does that set as we think about trying to move forward? I think the other thing that it makes me think about, and the place where I have hope, is when we have activists doing the work and showing up anyways, like Stacey Abrams, to transform this country in ways people just did not expect. And so even though we know they're going to come for our voting rights, the ability for us to mobilize, to strategize, what is Killer Mike, plot, plan, mobilize, strategize, like for us to be able to come together and do the work to change this country, that is where my hope lies, because we have done it consistently, and I can count on us to bounce back and do what's necessary to push us forward for what may be left of America.
Yeah. Dr. J, do you have any final thoughts, and, you know, what's your hope for the future? Oh, wait.
Yes. I think we need to really keep our eye on white supremacy and whiteness, because those constructs at the end of the day is what's really operating here. Because there's Black people who are in QAnon. I mean, I know some. There's Black people who were at the Capitol riot that day. I mean, there's people of color who hold racist attitudes and beliefs, and so I know that's really internalized from all these messages we're getting. People often want to get closer to whiteness so that they can feel like they're going to be okay. They're going to be the chosen ones. They're going to be the ones who are special and who are sort of not treated the same way as other people who look like them. And so it's really that white supremacy that the whiteness that is at the issue here. It's not necessarily people, but it's that construct and the way that people hold on to it that really has us where we are at this point in our country.
Rebecca, what about you?
So this is exhausting. Being Black and having to talk about race and teach people about race is exhausting. I'll say that. I don't like that it sits on our shoulders, but I don't know another option to policing it or to telling white people or white folks that's incorrect. And you need to work on that. But we talked about the pandemic at the start. So I would say being as social as you can, even if it's talking to somebody, I find that helps. Remembering to drink water and to take care of yourself because self-preservation is very, very important. So that's all that I have right now. I also want people to just love on one another in any way that you can, because it's important. I just want the world to be a place where we love one another and treat each other better.
Yeah, that's literally my hope, is that what Kalia said earlier, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, but I'm hopeful for the better. The other thing is, I want people to stop trying to pimp Black and brown people for their knowledge and not pay them. If you're going to pick people's brains, I need you to pick the price point in my in my offer of services. And so if you want us to educate you, that's fine. We appreciate you, but it's hard out here. And because Black and brown people are hit significantly harder in the areas of, unemployment and things of that nature, I just think that that's really important. For people who are part of the Patreon community, every episode we're going to have a syllabus that goes along with it. And so we're going to highlight some Black and brown people that you can learn from regarding race in America. We're not going to push that other book that's very popular, because it's not, I'm not going to even say the title of it. We're going to send you book titles that are by Black and brown people who are doing the work, because we want you to support them. Dr. J, did you have something?
I was just going to say that I charge $50 an hour to pick my brain.
Boom. So y'all listen, and it's well worth it. Like, if you really want to be helpful, that's what you do. So we're going to leave it there. I know that there's so much more we could say. I am super grateful for y'all for just sharing your hearts, your mind, your spirit, and what was on that. We got a lot more episodes that are coming. So I hope that y'all stay tuned.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.